Brutal radio clash between Lewis Hamilton and Frédéric Vasseur. Stay until the end to catch every detail and witness Ferrari's shocking punishment for Hamilton. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Just when it felt like Formula One had already delivered every twist, scandal, and psychological warfare imaginable, the world of motorsport has been flipped inside out by a revelation so profound, so jarring, that its consequences are rippling beyond the paddock walls, shaking not only Ferrari to its foundation but also reshaping how the entire grid views the once unshakable partnership forming between Lewis Hamilton and the most iconic team in racing history. Fred Vasseur, in what many are now describing as a reckless move, or perhaps a desperate cry for control, has publicly acknowledged a critical internal failure, one that targeted no less than their newest, highest-profile acquisition, seven-time world champion Lewis Hamilton. What was first dismissed as a typical mid-qualifying radio hiccup has now ballooned into a scandal drenched in controversy, mismanagement, and what many insiders are calling a betrayal from within. It began in Monaco, the jewel of the calendar, the unforgiving labyrinth of barriers and apexes where perfection is mandatory and precision is the currency of survival. In Q2, Hamilton was in the zone, piecing together a lap that would have positioned him comfortably in the upper echelon of the grid. But in the chaos of slow laps, traffic management, and positioning games, Hamilton received a radio message from his race engineer, Riccardo Adami, a message that would derail not only his lap but also the entire strategic rhythm of Ferrari's weekend. He was told Verstappen was on a cool-down lap. But that message was wrong. Catastrophically wrong. Verstappen was, in fact, charging at full speed, and Hamilton's positioning left the Red Bull driver compromised through the tunnel. The stewards reacted swiftly and harshly, a three-place grid penalty for Hamilton, citing impeding during a flying lap. On any other circuit, the penalty might have been recoverable. But in Monaco, where overtaking is a myth and clean air is more valuable than gold, it was a death sentence. Hamilton, who should have started from P4, was now exiled to P7, his entire race compromised before the first light turned green. But the punishment wasn't what hurt the most, it was the origin of the mistake. It wasn't the FIA. It wasn't external interference. It wasn't the unpredictable dance of traffic. The mistake came from his own team. From the pit wall. From the very voice in his ear that is supposed to be his compass, his lifeline, his source of absolute clarity when milliseconds mean everything. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. As the weekend unfolded, the cracks deepened. In the race, Hamilton was laser-focused, committed, precise, but the tools to fight were slipping away from him not because of pace, but because of silence. Every time he reached out for strategy updates, for data points, for real-time information, what came back was hollow. What's the delta to Russell? Silence. Can I push now? No response. Is there an undercut window opening? Vague answers. He was racing blind, operating at the edge of his ability with only fragments of the picture, and every lap added to the storm building inside the cockpit. Eventually, the dam broke. On lap 41, as the midfield train stagnated and every second became a lost opportunity, Hamilton's voice cut through the static, sharp, raw, and boiling with disbelief. You're not answering the question. Am I a minute behind or not? That wasn't anger anymore. That was something colder. A sense of betrayal. Of abandonment. Of being fed misinformation and then left alone to deal with the fallout. It was the voice of a man who had given everything, his brand, his legend, his belief, to an organization that seemed unable or unwilling to match the same standard of excellence. And just when fans believed things couldn't get more dramatic, Fred Vasseur poured gasoline on the fire. In a post-race debrief that was supposed to be clinical and focused, Vasseur, visibly frustrated, did the unthinkable. He turned the spotlight not inward, not toward systems or process flaws, but directly toward Hamilton. In front of press and senior team members, he lashed out. This is not how we operate at Ferrari. Lewis must adapt. This is not Mercedes. There are expectations. There is a way we communicate, and emotional outbursts over the radio will not fix anything. The room froze. Even Ferrari insiders were stunned. For a team that prided itself on discretion and family-style unity, to publicly call out a legend, to deflect blame in such a blunt fashion, it was unprecedented. Within minutes, the media exploded. Every pundit, every former driver, every analyst began dissecting not just the words, but the motives behind them. Was Vasseur trying to reassert control? Was he being politically pressured? Was this about Leclerc, whose silence throughout the controversy was deafening? Or was this the first open fracture in what many feared could become a toxic, unsalvageable relationship? Back at the Mercedes garage, which Hamilton had only recently left behind, there were whispers of sympathy. One engineer anonymously stated, "We never left Lewis blind. Never. If he asked, we answered. Always." On social media, fans began turning on Ferrari. Hashtags like #FreeHamilton, #FerrariFailure, and #BlindfoldedInRed trended worldwide. And in forums and behind closed doors, executives were suddenly forced to confront the unthinkable. Had Ferrari already squandered the opportunity to extract greatness from Hamilton before it even truly began? Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. This was supposed to be the resurgence. The storybook pairing. The redemptive arc of two titans, Hamilton, chasing an eighth, and Ferrari, desperate to end a two-decade drought. But now, the fairy tale was unraveling. It wasn't just about Monaco. It wasn't just about one radio error. It was about trust, communication, leadership, and whether the most powerful name in F1 history had walked into a structure incapable of holding the weight of his legacy. As the F1 world braces for the next round, all eyes aren't just on lap times anymore. They're on body language in the paddock. They're on how the radio calls sound in real time. They're on who speaks and who stays silent. Because what happened in Monaco didn't just cost Hamilton a better grid slot. It may have triggered the first domino in a chain reaction that could determine the future of one of the most high-profile collaborations in Formula One's modern era. And in a sport where momentum is everything, Ferrari might already be losing theirs, not on the stopwatch, but in the soul of the team. After the checkered flag fell over the narrow streets of Monte Carlo, there was no explosion of celebration, no outpouring of relief, no cathartic release of tension from the radio. Just quiet resignation. Lewis Hamilton rolled across the finish line in fifth place, and though that position was respectable in a vacuum, especially at a circuit as notoriously difficult to overtake on as Monaco, it was hollow. The kind of hollow that eats away at competitors long after the race is over. The kind of hollow that doesn't come from losing, but from knowing you were never given the chance to fight properly. The car had potential. The strategy had flashes of promise. The driver, as always, was relentless. But something had been missing. Something essential. Something that couldn't be seen on a timing screen or decoded from telemetry. And it all crystallized with one soft, almost childlike question over the team radio that caught everyone off guard. Are you upset with me or something? Are you mad at me? The words didn't come out in anger. They weren't shouted, weren't accusatory. They came with hesitation, almost a whisper. As if Hamilton himself didn't want to hear the answer. As if the weight of everything that had happened had reduced one of the sport's most decorated drivers to a man just trying to understand the silence that had surrounded him in the most pivotal moments of the race. But what followed was even more jarring than any angry reply could have been. Nothing. Absolute nothing. Not a peep. No clicks. No interference. No reassuring voice chiming in to dismiss his concern. Just emptiness. The type of emptiness that screams louder than any tirade ever could. It wasn't just a momentary glitch. It wasn't a case of comms dropout or scrambled frequency. It was pure absence, deliberate, intentional, engineered absence. And it lingered. As he slowed the car on the cool-down lap, the silence stayed. Not even a good job, Lewis. Not a debrief. Not a voice. Just the dull hum of the power unit and the screech of his own thoughts echoing inside his helmet. It wasn't until hours later, long after the paddock began to clear and the champagne had gone flat, that the real explanation started to seep out. And it didn't come from Hamilton's race engineer, nor from a vague technical press release. It came directly from the lips of Scuderia Ferrari team principal Frédéric Vasseur, standing in front of a group of reporters, eyes guarded, choosing each word like a man walking through a minefield. The silence, he explained, was not due to a technical failure. It was policy. Policy. That one word dropped like a stone into the still waters of the Monaco paddock. Heads turned. Brows furrowed. Vasseur went on, revealing that Ferrari had an internal protocol still in place, a rule that strictly limited when engineers were allowed to communicate with drivers. Only on straights. Not during corners. Not during braking zones. Not in sequences of turns. The idea, according to the team's operational philosophy, was to avoid distracting the driver at critical moments of performance. On paper, a noble idea. A logical framework. A method to reduce chaos and maximize clarity. But there was just one problem. This wasn't Bahrain. This wasn't Monza. This was Monaco, the most uniquely demanding circuit on the calendar. A layout that famously contains no true straights. A layout where the longest full-throttle section barely allows time to catch a breath. A layout where precision is measured in centimeters and decisions must be made 3 corners ahead. And yet Ferrari, in all its storied glory, in all its institutional weight, chose to follow protocol. They chose the manual over the moment. The policy over the person. They stuck to the letter of the rule while ignoring the soul of the race. And in doing so, they abandoned one of the greatest drivers in history during a race that demanded nothing less than perfect synchronicity between man and machine and team. Hamilton hadn't asked for a miracle. He hadn't asked for the impossible. All he had asked for, silently through his driving, and eventually allowed through that one trembling question, was connection, guidance, support. But when he reached out, he was met with the sound of a team that had convinced itself that its rulebook was more important than its relationship with the driver in the cockpit. This wasn't merely a tactical oversight. This wasn't a miscalculation of tire life or an undercut gone wrong. This was philosophical failure. A structural weakness. An error in the very foundation of how Ferrari operates under pressure. And what made it all the more heartbreaking was that it wasn't born out of malice. No one at Ferrari set out to sabotage Hamilton. But sometimes the most devastating damage comes not from enemies, but from systems too rigid to adapt. From traditions too entrenched to evolve. From organizations that confuse procedure for purpose. Hamilton, for all his accolades, for all his wins and titles and records, had found himself trapped in a moment where he was no longer racing his rivals, but his own team's limitations. And the world saw it. The fans saw it. The commentators tried to dance around it. But the footage, the audio, the data, they didn't lie. In a sport where fractions of seconds mean everything, Ferrari had chosen to pause. In a place where instinct must override hesitation, Ferrari chose to hesitate. And in a race where communication could have been the difference between a podium and disappointment, Ferrari chose to be silent. The irony is cruel. In an era defined by hypercommunication, satellite feeds, AI-generated strategy overlays, real-time weather data, biometric analysis, a decision was made to not speak. In the name of clarity, they chose opacity. In the name of focus, they delivered abandonment. In the name of policy, they extinguished connection. And the silence that followed wasn't just a moment. It became a symbol. A microcosm of everything Ferrari had become under the weight of its own bureaucracy, elegant, historic, but occasionally paralyzed. As Hamilton stepped out of the car and walked through the paddock that evening, the camera caught a fleeting expression on his face. Not of rage, not of devastation, but of something deeper. Disbelief, perhaps. Or something closer to grief. The grief of realizing that when he needed his team most, when he dared to show vulnerability and ask a human question in the middle of a mechanical war, the answer wasn't there. Not because it couldn't be, but because a rulebook said it shouldn't be. And in that moment, the world didn't just witness the end of a race. It witnessed a revelation, that behind the glamour and the millions, behind the carbon fiber and telemetry, the soul of Formula One still depends on something fragile, trust. And trust, once broken by silence, is infinitely harder to rebuild than a broken wing or a faulty engine. Lewis Hamilton is no stranger to pressure. He doesn't flinch under the spotlight, doesn't crumble when expectations tower above him. He's been through championship deciders, title droughts, political storms within teams, and media hurricanes outside them. He's been loved, hated, revered, doubted, sometimes all in the same weekend. So no, he's not a rookie. He's not someone who needs to be told what gear to be in, what line to take, or how to compose himself under fire. But none of that changes the reality that in 2025, at Ferrari, he is still the new guy. New environment. New engineers. New culture. New systems. New car. And this particular car, the SF25, isn't just a new machine to learn. It's a philosophy. One that demands understanding, patience, synergy. And at Monaco, the most merciless circuit on the calendar, that understanding, or lack of it, came crashing into view in the most brutal way possible. From the outside, Hamilton's weekend looked unremarkable. But dig beneath the surface, and what you find is a weekend where one of the greatest drivers of all time was left stranded, not because of lack of speed, but because of silence. He was left guessing, reacting, waiting. Monaco isn't a circuit you survive through hesitation. You conquer it through clarity, through conviction, through trust. And Hamilton had none of that. Not when it mattered most. Had he started where he should have, up in P4, the race would have unfolded with an entirely different rhythm. From that position, on a track where overtaking is borderline impossible, he could have dictated his strategy, managed his tires on his terms, baited undercuts from rivals, and turned defensive stints into offensive windows. Ferrari had the pace. He had the racecraft. The two-stop strategy was on the table. But instead, he was shackled behind slower cars, stuck in the fumes of exhausts, forced to react to strategies crafted around others, rather than executing his own. His tires deteriorated with every lap of indecision. His rhythm broke. His confidence eroded, not in his ability, but in the people guiding him. The moment his race engineer radioed in mid-race with the phrase, "This is our race," the confusion it triggered was palpable. Hamilton, for all his experience, had no idea what that was supposed to mean. Was it an instruction to attack? To hold position? Was it code for defending against Alonso or cueing a move on Norris or even Leclerc? The ambiguity was staggering. At that level, at Ferrari, during that race, there is no excuse for such a critical communication to be vague. And it wasn't just strategy that collapsed. It was trust. It was belief. It was momentum. What was lost wasn't just a podium finish. It was Hamilton's sense that the team had his back when the knives were out. The post-race fallout made it even clearer. What Fred Vasseur disclosed wasn't simply a justification for their approach. It was an indictment. A quiet, almost accidental confession that Ferrari's internal culture remains trapped between eras. A place where rigid hierarchy and protocol still suffocate instinct. Where procedures take precedence over improvisation. Where engineers feel safer sticking to the manual than daring to call an audible when the moment demands it. And this is the paradox at the heart of Ferrari's current crisis. They hired Lewis Hamilton, a master of adaptability, a man whose greatest weapon is his ability to read a race as it unfolds, who operates not just on talent, but feel, flow, and finesse, and they're trying to funnel that into a system that doesn't breathe, doesn't flex, doesn't evolve on the fly. Hamilton thrives when the car is an extension of his intuition, when the messages from the pit wall come not as orders but as dialogue. He doesn't need instructions spoon-fed. He needs clarity, decisiveness, precision. And at Ferrari, he's discovering something uncomfortable. He might not be driving the SF25. It might be the SF25 driving him. The team isn't empowering him, they're constraining him. Not intentionally, but structurally. And that's even more dangerous. To make matters more complicated, this is all happening at a time when Charles Leclerc, the golden child of Maranello, is peaking. His performances are smooth, confident, and consistent. He's collecting podiums with surgical execution. He's speaking less and delivering more. The optics are powerful. Internally, the momentum is shifting toward him. The engineers he's grown up with trust him. The team knows his preferences. The factory believes in his rhythm. And even though Ferrari would never admit it publicly, there's a gravitational pull happening, subtle but undeniable, toward their homegrown star. And this is where the storm really starts to build. Because while Leclerc is rising, Hamilton is discovering that his position is far more fragile than anyone predicted. He was brought in to reignite Ferrari's title hopes, to bring in championship-winning habits, to unify the team under a mindset of excellence and execution. But what happens if the very culture he was supposed to transform refuses to budge? What happens when the legend starts to look peripheral? What happens when strategy meetings are framed around one driver's comfort, and not the other's? The risk isn't just competitive imbalance, it's emotional disintegration. Hamilton is a competitor who gives everything, emotionally, mentally, physically. But he's also someone who needs to feel the environment is evolving with him. When he senses stagnation, he doesn't settle. He speaks up. And when he feels unheard, he doesn't quietly accept it. He either confronts or withdraws. Ferrari has seen both sides now, the collaboration and the confrontation. If they continue down this path, where communication is cryptic, feedback is ignored, and Leclerc becomes the gravitational center, they may not just lose Hamilton's podiums. They may lose Hamilton's soul. And when that goes, there's no strategy in the world that can replace it. Worse still, the fans are watching. The media is watching. The world is watching. Hamilton didn't just join Ferrari, he committed to them. He made the move that stunned the world, walked away from Mercedes, gambled on the Scuderia, because he believed in the idea of revival. He bought into the romance. But romance without results is just nostalgia. And nostalgia doesn't win championships. If Ferrari fails to adapt, not just tactically, but culturally, they risk creating a rift that no apology or podium can mend. They're not just managing a driver. They're managing a legacy, a reputation, a movement. And right now, that movement is sputtering. Not because Hamilton isn't fast. Not because the car isn't capable. But because when the pressure peaked, when clarity was needed, when the opportunity to seize Monaco was within reach, Ferrari blinked. And Hamilton felt it. In the silence. In the hesitation. In the foggy radio calls. And maybe most painfully, in the realization that the dream he chased to Maranello might still be wrapped in red, but it isn't being written with him, it's being written around him. Fred Vasseur can stand before the cameras and offer the customary soundbites, the expected post-race platitudes, the classic assurance that everything will be reviewed, but anyone paying attention knows that words are running on fumes. Reviewing isn't enough. Analysis isn't action. In a sport where milliseconds separate the sublime from the catastrophic, the mere suggestion of a passive internal audit feels like a smokescreen for something far more dangerous: inertia. Lewis Hamilton isn't in this sport to be debriefed into irrelevance. He isn't here to be another gear in a slow-turning machine built on nostalgia and tradition. He's here to rewrite history. And right now, Ferrari isn't giving him the tools to do it. You could hear it in his voice in Monaco. Or more accurately, what wasn't in his voice. The silence on team radio, the lack of clear strategy, the absence of proactive calls, the disjointed, almost hesitant energy, wasn't just noticeable. It was damning. At key moments, Hamilton was left feeling like a passenger in a ship with no captain. The trust that's supposed to flow both ways between driver and pit wall seemed frayed, if not entirely severed. Every time the camera cut to the Ferrari pit wall, the expressions were unreadable, not with calculated focus, but with indecision. And indecision, when you're going up against Verstappen, Norris, Russell and Leclerc, is death by 1,000 cuts. This isn't a problem of one weekend or one race strategy. This is a philosophical crisis. Hamilton thinks in real time, faster than real time, actually. He's processing tire wear, track evolution, delta times, virtual safety car probabilities, weather radar, ERS harvesting, all while defending, attacking, and staying within track limits at 300 km per hour. He's doing this with surgical precision, lap after lap. And what he needs is a team that can operate on that same level of mental sharpness, that same rhythm of intuition and execution. Not a group of engineers paralyzed by fear of making the wrong call. Not a leadership structure still haunted by mistakes made under different regimes. He doesn't need a team that hopes the race comes to them. He needs a team that takes the race by the throat. Right now, Ferrari is nowhere near that. The red suit may look iconic. The paddock presence may feel mythical. But the substance underneath is not matching the shine. Hamilton's radio shouldn't be a static-filled echo chamber. It should be a surgical tool. A feedback loop so sharp, so efficient, so deadly that it feels like an extension of his own instincts. Instead, it's become a liability. A lagging signal. A source of frustration. And perhaps worst of all, a symbol of how far behind Ferrari still is in understanding what it truly takes to operate at the very edge of elite. It would be easy to chalk Monaco up to the circuit, to the impossible overtakes, to the traffic. But that would be missing the bigger picture. Monaco was simply the pressure cooker that revealed the cracks that have been forming slowly since the start of this partnership. The hesitation in Baku, the strategic missteps in Shanghai, the inconsistent communication in Imola, the emotional restraint in Lewis's interviews, where he says just enough to remain loyal but never enough to hide his growing unease. All of it building. All of it accumulating. And now, with the season entering its most brutal phase, Ferrari faces a decision that will define not just 2025, but the legacy of this entire project. Because make no mistake, this was supposed to be the redemption arc. The epic tale of Hamilton, the warrior prince of F1, returning not to Mercedes, not to Red Bull, but to the Scuderia. To bring Maranello back to where it belongs. To lift the Scarlet Empire out of its tactical haze and remind the world why Ferrari isn't just a team, but an idea. That's what this partnership was supposed to be. A masterstroke. A legend finding new life in the most legendary place of all. But that story only works if the pieces around him rise to the occasion. And right now, they aren't rising. They're retracting. Playing it safe. Waiting too long to pit. Leaving him vulnerable on track. Failing to build a car that suits his style through the corners where he works his magic. Fumbling the very basics of race execution that define titles in the era of data-driven dominance. This isn't the Ferrari of Schumacher and Brawn. This isn't even the Ferrari of 2018, which at least threatened the throne. This version of Ferrari is stuck in a dangerous limbo, too ambitious to admit fault, too uncertain to fix what's clearly broken. And Hamilton? He doesn't have time for limbo. He doesn't have the luxury of patience. Every race matters. Every lap carries weight. Every decision echoes across the season like a drumbeat. He didn't come to Ferrari to finish fourth. He didn't put his legacy on the line to hear "we'll look into it" after a weekend that exposed more flaws than fixes. He came to win. To dominate. To leave the sport with something no one saw coming. And that dream, that vision, is now on life support, not because of his performance, but because of the system around him that still doesn't understand what he is, or how to match the speed of his mind. And it's not just Hamilton who feels it. The entire grid feels it. Rivals see the hesitation. Teams sense the dysfunction. Everyone knows Ferrari has the resources, the talent, the brand power. But that's not enough. Legacy without execution is meaningless. Pedigree without hunger is pointless. The Scuderia is staring down the barrel of another wasted season. Another year of what-ifs. Another chapter in the long, painful novel of missed opportunities. And time is running out. The next race won't just be a chance to score points. It will be a referendum. A reckoning. Every move Ferrari makes, every pit call, every tire strategy, every update to the chassis, will be analyzed not for its impact on a single Sunday, but for what it says about the organization's ability to change, to learn, to adapt, and to want it badly enough to throw the rulebook out and start acting like they've got the most dangerous weapon in motorsport sitting in their car, begging to be unleashed. Hamilton doesn't want excuses. He wants action. He doesn't want analysis. He wants aggression. He doesn't want reassurance. He wants results. And if Ferrari can't deliver those things now, not later, not after the break, not once the next upgrade is ready, but now, then this partnership will die with a whimper, not a roar. And the tragedy won't be that it ended. It will be that it never really began. So now we wait. We watch. We listen for the next moment on the radio where things either click or collapse. Because the silence after Monaco wasn't just disappointing, it was deafening. And if you're still watching, if you followed this saga to this point, then you know, what's coming isn't just another Grand Prix. It's a test of will, of identity, of everything Ferrari claims to be. Either they wake up, or they get left behind. Either they change, or they get forgotten. Because the next chapter isn't just a continuation. It's an ultimatum.